Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Lisa Millman. I'm the specialist at the Parent Resource Center, and we would like to welcome you to this webinar about digital wellness and when is the internet an addiction? When is it a problem? Kristelle Lavallee Collins is the Senior Content Strategist at the Digital Wellness Lab at Boston Children's Hospital, as well as the Child Development Experts at Mediatrix Incorporated and the second half of Ask the Mediatrician podcast. Kristelle has co-authored numerous journal articles, book chapters, and academic papers, and her work has been presented at psychological, communications, and educational conferences around the world. She is an instructor of health communications at Tufts University and speaks locally and internationally to clinician, parent, educator, tech, and community groups about the influence and importance of media and media literacy on family and child health. Prior to joining the Digital Wellness Lab, Ms. Lavallee Collins worked as a private school teacher at the Park Street School in Boston and later as an associate producer at Kids Cook Productions. Ms. Lavallee Collins holds a BA in psychology and communication arts from Gordon College and an MA in child study and human development from Tufts University. So I would like to welcome Kristelle. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Lisa. So I'm going to go ahead and get started and let me know if there's we tested this before, so hopefully there won't be any issues in seeing my screen. Okay. So first, I just want to say thank you so much and a big thanks to Lisa and team for organizing this. Excuse me. So happy October, happy Friday, happy fall. I first want to start off with a little bit about the Digital Wellness Lab. And that is, we are at Boston Children's Hospital. We exist to understand and promote wellness in the digital age. And we do this by bringing together thought leaders from tech, from entertainment, from the health sciences to build a digital environment that advances the well-being of families, society, and humanity at large. So I hope you will all come up to Boston and visit us. We are built on these 4 pillars, the first being research, and that is we really strive to bring everything, and excuse me, I'm so sorry. It is very dry Boston in fall here, so I apologize for my voice. I did just make myself a second cup of tea, so hopefully it'll continue to be okay here. But our first pillar is actually research, and that is that everything that we do at the lab is built on science, science and hard academic evidence. So for those of you who are interested in kind of learning more about the science behind everything that will be presented today, we do have a robust library of research. I know Lisa has shared a lot of our resources already with you all through email, and I will go ahead and explain more of those if there are any questions on anything that is being presented today. The education arm, that's really where I sit. My background was that, and I'm so sorry, was really on, sorry about this. Thank you. Was really on developmental psychology, and I have a background actually as an educator myself. So it is, again, my pleasure to be here. I take all of the research and science and translate it into information and different resources for parents, for educators, for clinicians, as well as teens and children themselves. We'll also be talking at length about the clinical components. So as Lisa mentioned before, kind of figuring out, there's a lot of kind of misnomer terminology about addiction. So we'll really break down the science and also explain why it's different from addiction. And then finally, the newest arm, we partner with folks such as the Walt Disney Company, Sesame Workshop, TikTok, and Facebook, among others, to really help inform what the work that they do, the apps that they build, the technologies that they provide, as well as the entertainment, to really start building wellness into it from a scientific basis. So again, this is kind of who we are. Hopefully that'll help set up the framework too for our discussions here together today. So I want to start off more broadly, and these are the World Health Organization's determinants of health. And the first is the social and economic environment, as well as the physical environment. And then the person's individual characteristics and behaviors. So that's, the genetics, who we are, who you are, who I am, all the things that we bring together. So I want to focus first for our purposes on the physical environment. And that is because we really see media as the 21st century environmental health influence. So what I mean by that is media are everywhere. Our founder and director, Dr. Michael Rich, likes to say it is in the air that we breathe and the water that we drink. You cannot avoid screens in today's day and age. I'm sure all of you are very well aware of that. These are just some examples. The first being, oftentimes now before kids are even born, they're online. And we see that through these clever birth announcements where, you see the sonogram picture. If it's not on some social media post, it's being texted to you. You already know about the child's existence before they actually physically exist outside of the womb. Once they're born, they're often put directly in front of a screen. That might not be necessarily the parents doing. It could just be when they walk outside. And this picture over here of the city, it could easily be, I'm often asked, is it Times Square? This is actually in China, but it could easily be Times Square. It could easily be any urban city, Chicago, etc. They all have areas like this. In the pandemic, however, we really saw a total shift, which we'll talk a lot about in today's discussion. But media became a lifesaver. It became the way that we order food. It became the way that we celebrate. As someone who got married during the pandemic, Zoom weddings were very common. We also had Zoom birthday parties. It was just a way to stay in touch with grandma, grandpa, and stay safe. We also saw Zoom school. It was the way that we connected with each other in order to learn as well. And then finally, just another, for those of you who have gas-powered cars, you cannot even, up here anyway, you cannot visit a gas station without being bombarded by screens. So again, when we're thinking about this issue, the lab is part of the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. So we really are framing this as a public health issue. So just a good thing to kind of keep in mind as we advance here. So this is the primary question that the lab asks. And I will say, when I'm talking about children, I don't want anybody to feel like their child isn't in this bucket, because we're really talking about birth to age 25. So anytime a child doesn't have a fully formed prefrontal, or a human doesn't have a fully formed prefrontal cortex, that's the gamut that we run here. So this question is, can the screen media children use and how they use them influence their health and development? And I'm sure by now, all of you, because you're here, you know that the answer to that question is an overwhelming and resounding yes. And I'm also here to say that we have that science and evidence to back each and every single one of these health concerns and health issues. So everything from sexual behaviors to connectedness to violence, physical violence, mental violence as well. And I'm only going to be able to touch on a few of these today for those purposes, but for those of you who are interested, again, all of these resources and the science behind them is available through the lab. So the next framing device I want to use is actually one that is really, really helpful, and was really helpful for me even in college when I was first starting to learn about this. And that's thinking about media as a super peer. So we all are familiar with peer pressure, especially when it comes to adolescents. But again, we're covering from birth to 25. So this was actually a term that was coined by a pediatrician in the 1980s. His name was Victor Strasberger. So he was looking at this issue, and he was looking at this issue primarily when television was reigning supreme. But he noted that media functioned to exert even greater pressure than peer pressure on teens, because they make certain risky activities. He was looking specifically at fighting substance abuse, sexual relations, seem like they are normal. And he narrowed down these 4 kind of categories here, but as you can tell, they all relate to health. But it's just a helpful way of thinking of this. And one of the ways I also, when I talk to teens about this, when you think about social media, and most teens want to be some form of a social media influencer, that's kind of the same idea as a super peer. So social media has certainly exacerbated or made this issue even more prominent, more pronounced, but it's a really good framing device. And again, for thinking about the ways in which the media we interact with and consume influence our day-to-day lives, especially when it comes to the lives of children. So I want to start out with some data. Some of you may have actually participated in this pulse survey. This was this is something that the lab put out. The first one was actually done in March of this year. So if you think back to where we were in March, we had actually been a year into the pandemic, a year into thinking about, being on online school, having this influx of Zoom celebrations, things like that. So after a year, we really wanted to see what were the lived experiences of families living on Zoom and kind of dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic. So these pulse surveys, I will say they are survey data, but they're also somewhat research-based in that we analyze them, and our research scientists actually develop them. They go through our process for screening. And these were some of the primary questions that we asked here. And I'm really sorry, guys, it's so dry in here, and I do have a humidifier going. How has the overall use of interactive screen media changed for children during the COVID-19 pandemic? What are parents' concerns and observations about the links between their children's interactive screen use and their mental health? And what has been young people's experience with remote schooling? So this first one should come as no surprise to any of you. All of us had our screen media impacted by being in lockdowns, by having social distancing measures, and all of that screen media use increased during the pandemic. And the reason why I like to show this screen is actually because we can see the drastic jump. And I think right now, again, this was in March of this year, I think right now we're all kind of suffering from a collective amnesia. We think, oh yeah, it's gotten bad, but I don't even remember not using this. So this is just a healthy reminder to say, oh my gosh, we are using it so much more. And I'll go into some updated stats too. This one was of particular interest to us because when we first asked parents and we were first kind of seeing at the lab what was going on, we saw that parents were reporting that they were arguing much more frequently with their children. And I'm sure, judging by some of the questions that you all filled out in your registration, that these arguments were most likely true in your household as well. So a lot of parents came to us saying, like, we're arguing all the time about media use. So in order to kind of drill down and say, okay, what are these arguments exactly? What are the problems that are happening in the household? We asked a little bit more granular questions to say, okay, what are the topics of disagreement? So that is the circle that you'll see down here at the bottom of your screen. So the topics, actually, 44% of these arguments were about screen time, the notion of screen time, which we will go into because screen time is an obsolete concept. So when we heard that it was really mostly about screen time, we actually didn't worry nearly as much because we know, again, with the pandemic, all of us were on screens all the time and we needed to be. So again, we needed to drill a little bit farther to say, okay, we see that it's a problem that parents are feeling that their kids are on screens too much. Given the context of our environment, we are not as concerned. When they are using it, that was 32%. That is more of a concern because we know the importance of sleep, and we know that screens interfering with sleep can cause major health concerns. And we also know that things like having a media-free meal is incredibly important and beneficial to a child and overall family health and wellness. But then the lowest was actually what they are using, the actual content, which has the most concern in terms of health. So hopefully this is kind of resonating with you all. It's good to see how your household kind of compares to other households because I think we're all kind of collectively in this same boat. Parents reported that media use has both helped and hurt their children's well-being. So you can see this is primarily, we see the biggest kind of hurts over here with physical health, which we will go into for sure. But overall, it's relatively positive. You can see even mental health and educational achievement. Parents were reporting that their media use actually helped their well-being. Children are using tech to connect with family and friends remotely through various platforms. I'm sure, again, this all rings true for you. It's just good to kind of see the ways in which they are doing it. And this one was really surprising to us. The majority of parents reported positive experiences with remote learning. And the reason why this was really surprising to us was, if you recall back in March, there were a lot of news headlines that were all about learning loss, about remote school failures, about families really struggling. And those struggles are real and those struggles happened. They just weren't as severe as the news, or widespread as the news media made it seem. So 62% of parents surveyed said that their children have actually had a positive experience with remote learning, which is really, really wonderful to hear. Even more wonderful from our perspective was this next stat, and that is 54% of parents surveyed said that they always or often observe their children's remote learning. And the reason why that is so important is because we know when parents are involved in a child's life in terms of media, whether that's social media, whether that's watching the same movies or television, whenever there's a parent involved, that actually mitigates the risk of any negative health concerns when it comes to that child. So this is huge. This is really important and really wonderful to be able to report. So this is just a breakdown about how parents and kids were using media together more frequently, everything from watching TV to playing video games on a mobile device. So again, this was really a positive outcome, having parents now involved in their children's media activities. Parents reported that remote learning helped their children's reading and math skills, but many saw it as harmful to their children's social skills. So this is just in the context of remote learning. And this is largely because when we drilled a little deeper, this was really that SEL, the social emotional learning component. They felt that they just were not getting it. We know how important the school community is. And parents did not feel that remote learning was giving their child that kind of community feel, that connection with their friends, that they feel, the connection with their teachers that they feel is also so, so important, school officials and administrators as well. This next question was actually born out of a personal experience. Our lead research scientist, Dr. David Bickham, who was the lead on this study too, he has an 8-year-old, and he was noticing that his 8-year-old, who is relatively happy and happy-go-lucky and really wonderful, at the end of each school day was reporting all of these health symptoms. So he was saying his head hurt, his back hurt, his eyes hurt, and he was super tired. And David, our lead research scientist, was like, is this normal? Are other parents experiencing this? And the answer that he got from the survey was absolutely yes. So there were physical tolls that actually came about because of doing this, because of remote learning and kids spending so much time on screens. And the reason why I think this is also important to report is the idea of taking movement breaks, of the idea of, if remote learning is here to stay, because we did see that it was optimal for some kids, how can we make it even more developmentally optimal, more effective for those kids as well? So now I just, and I promise to go into more fun things, not just hard data soon, but we actually repeated this survey. We did different participants. Again, it was nationally representative. And by repeat, I mean, we did another pulse survey. These were different questions. We wanted to take a gauge of, okay, now that we've been out of the school year, how did the summer fare? So this is really important to see like where we are now. So the timing of this presentation is wonderful because this is brand new data. This is from last month in September. So these were the kind of primary questions that we asked. And the results were very interesting because we really thought, our guess was that pandemic levels of media use were actually going to drop. We felt that after remote schooling and after this year of everybody being on screens, everyone was going to flee their screens, get outside, get active, not want to be on screens anymore. And we did not see that at all. In fact, according to parents, pandemic levels of media use continued into the summer, which is shocking on 2 levels. 1, for the reason that I just stated, and 2, because historically we always see media levels drop in the summer months. This past year, that was not true. And we'll talk about what that means for this year and the school year. Also interesting, this summer, while most parents reported that children stopped using media before 10 p.m., many children still use media past midnight. And I will say that this survey specifically was on children ages 5 through 18. So typically in the summer, we do see delayed onset of bedtimes, kids going to bed later and later because they don't have to wake up for school the next day. But what was interesting about this stat is the media use after midnight and the media use component here, because as we will go into a little bit later. And as I'm sure you all know, media use before bed is really detrimental to the quantity and quality of not only children's sleep, everybody's sleep, but especially kids' sleep, where they need it for their development. Using social media to connect with friends helped children's mental health and relationships. There's a lot of negativity right now, especially around social media. So I think this stat is important to remember, that it's not all bad at all. This is the new normal. This was the new normal even pre-pandemic, with kids connecting with their friends here. And it's actually, we're seeing a lot of benefits from social media use. Screen media both encouraged and interfered with different summer activities. I really want to draw your attention to sleeping and outdoor time. And outdoor time has actual real effects on physical health. And we'll go into a little bit of obesity too and what that means. And after a typical day of screen media use this summer, parents reported that their child experienced the following. So we still saw those same health concerns, those same physical health concerns from the prior survey that we reported on, still happening in this new one, which was really sad. Again, we were hoping that a lot of this would change during the summer when kids weren't having to do remote school. And again, we thought that families would be more out and about, but we are still in a pandemic, so this isn't that surprising. And then finally, before we kind of go into the health questions, many parents reported that their child's media use this summer has made them more prepared for returning to school. We are very excited to hear from educators to see if that is their take on this as well. But this is just parents reporting. They feel like it helped them become more behaviorally prepared, socially prepared, as well as academically prepared. So on the whole, parents are feeling pretty positive going into this school year. So it'll be great to hear from you all, as well as educators, if that panned out now that we're a month plus into this year. So that is kind of the state of the country right now in terms of media use. I hope that was helpful in terms of seeing where your family is. Drilling down into some specifics, especially for the context of school and for the context of school-age children. I want to talk a lot about physical activity. I spoke a couple of weeks ago at the National Obesity Conference. We have a lot of new robust information on physical activity and what happened during the pandemic, because there's a very, very big concern about the physical health of kids right now, especially when it comes to weight gain and overall physical health. So a few facts on this. Obesity now affects 1 in 5 children and teens in the United States. This is CDC data, the Center for Disease Control. They are conjecturing that this is actually much, much worse now. We just do not have, they are studying this now. So hopefully we'll have updated stats from them soon, but this was pre-pandemic levels. And right now, smaller studies are only pointing to this getting worse. We know that this is really detrimental to children's health and well-being, and it is detrimental to their overall, long-term health and well-being. We see this with cyberbullying, we see this with regular bullying, we see this with self-esteem and body image issues as well. In terms of research data that we do have coming from the pandemic, Italy, as you know, the COVID-19 pandemic hit them first. So they actually have been releasing some studies that they have found on this. Researchers found that the kids with obesity already under lockdown in Italy ate more junk food and watched more TV at the expense of physical activity. So going back to my comment about screen time really being an obsolete or a phrase that everybody is kind of bandying about that doesn't really have a lot of meaning anymore. And this study is really illustrative of that. It is not so much about the amount of time children are spending on screens. It is about what that time is displacing, or what are they doing instead. So in Italy, what they found is that instead of going outside, kids went to screens. So it wasn't that, it's not that screen media will make a child fat, which I think before and in the 1980s, with all this concern over television, it was, oh, your kid is going to become a couch potato, just sitting down and, eating chips on the couch and watching TV, they're going to gain a lot of weight. That conjecture never panned out research-wise. But what has panned out is that if your child used to be physically active during this time and is now displacing that time by being on screens, then we see this physical effect. So it is a nuance, but I think it's a really important nuance. And doctors especially are really trying to understand this displacement effect. And it's really good for parents and educators to understand it as well. And research published by the CDC this month, I will say this was last month, so I apologize, it wasn't published today, it was published in September, found that the rate of body mass index, or BMI, increased approximately doubled for kids and teens ages 2 to 19 during the pandemic compared to pre-pandemic periods. So it's definitely something that if you have noticed your child maybe being a little bit more sluggish, getting them out, encouraging all of that outdoor activity is incredibly important. I also want to talk a little bit about the concern itself with the media platforms. And this is because we know that advertising is so incredibly effective, especially targeted advertising towards kids. And this is what a lot of obesity researchers are very concerned about with what they're seeing in platforms, something that we at the lab are also very concerned about. So I want to just share some examples that you may or may not be familiar with. This picture actually of Tony the tiger is of me. This is through the Snapchat application. Snapchat has done something really brilliant in terms of the marketing world. They allow different filters, which I'm sure you all are familiar with, but they allow ads to make filters. So I am essentially sending a targeted ad of myself. So again, when you think of that super peer kind of pressure that media put, but I as a peer can send this targeted ad directly to my friends. So I'm basically doing Frosted Flakes or Kellogg's. I'm doing their work for them. And especially if you think of influencers doing this to their to their fans, to all of their followers, you can see how that's easily balloons. And we know that Frosted Flakes isn't exactly the most nutritionally dense food. So we're not seeing any kind of carrots or advertisements for healthy, nutritious foods. We typically see something like a really sugary breakfast cereal or other, energy drinks being advertised for in this platform. So it's definitely something to be aware about, something to talk about. Chipotle did a genius campaign last October during Halloween. They recognized that, kids were not able to be out and about kind of trick-or-treating. So they said, okay, listen, dress up, tell us why you like Chipotle in a TikTok video, and someone will win free Chipotle for a year. It ended up being one of the most successful social media campaigns of last year. It was their #Burrito campaign. And it was huge. It blew up. We know Chipotle is not the healthiest. It is a fast food option, but it was a brilliant way to market. And they really marketed towards families, families doing this in lieu of trick-or-treating. So again, something to be aware of when we think of this next kind of phase of advertising. We're also very concerned, and I'll go into this a little bit in the next slide, about advertising towards young, very young kids. You can see this here in this McDonald's post. This is for an advert game. These are for video games that basically are all about advertising. So this little avatar girl goes through this land that's populated with, things like French fries and Happy Meals. And it's a great way for advertisers to be pretty sneaky about, inserting their products into something that looks on the outset like a very innocent free game for kids. So definitely be aware of what your children is playing online, what the messages that they're seeing. And just to another kind of example, because this is everywhere, this is Taco Bell. They are partnering with Doritos on this campaign, and they're saying, hey, we're on Snapchat. So not only follow us on Twitter, but also get us on Snapchat and you'll get more deals. They often entice kids, adults too, with different deals that they can get. But really, it's free form of advertising. So one other thing that I will say is I did have the pleasure of meeting the head of, I think they called it the head of technology at Domino's. This was at a conference, and she stood up and said, Domino's does not consider itself a food company or a pizza company. We are a tech company, which kind of blew my mind at the time. This was about a decade ago now. And I was actually less than a decade ago. It was about 5 years ago. I was shocked, but she went through her whole presentation, and it really is a tech company. So you can see with their Anywhere campaign, which they launched a few years ago, they're on everything. They make it so easy for kids, mostly college kids, but also high schoolers, to get a pizza to their door. They are on Google, they are on Alexa, they are through your car, your smart TV, text messenger. You can tweet to Domino's and you'll have a pizza there in 5 minutes. They have really harnessed the power of technology to not only do advertising, but also get that pizza right to your door. And again, when we're talking about nutritional meals for growing children, this is fine once in a while, but if it's right there, they've seen incredible success with this campaign. We know that this can lead to unhealthy food preferences and food choices. And we also know that it increases preferences and requests to parents as well as schools for advertised products such as these. It increases the likelihood of less healthful diets for children. And it also increases the negative diet-related health outcomes and risks, which we know are numerous and profound. So this is definitely something to be aware of. This next one actually came out in January of this year. This was a small cover story on the New York Times up here, our kid influencers. This was done by 2 female research scientists who are also mothers. One of them noticed that their 3-year-old was all of a sudden requesting McDonald's. And they had been in lockdown. They had never gone to a McDonald's, and she was shocked. She's actually a media researcher in our field, and she just had no idea. She's very, very cautious. And she was like, I have got to get to the root of this. She found out that it was because she did let her child watch YouTube. YouTube influencer, this little boy, he's extremely popular, has a very big following. And he does unboxing videos, which are also very popular. And she noticed when she sat down, she had watched a number of them with her child. He has very long unboxing videos. And, one might start off with unboxing like a legitimate thing, a toy or something like that, that has no branding. And then all of a sudden he was unboxing McDonald's. And it turned out she dug a little deeper. She got her colleague involved. They launched a huge study. And they found that YouTube was allowing these advertisements. It wasn't made public, it wasn't being disclosed, but even these innocuous or seemingly innocent videos were actually ploys for ads, and McDonald's was paying them to do direct product placement to incredibly young children. This particular influencer is really big with a preschool set, and parents had identified this influencer as some safe content, but really it was a lot of advertising. We saw the same on TikTok. This young lady was actually being paid. She was incredibly popular. I think she still is, but always seen with an iced coffee, always seen with an iced coffee. And it turned out it was product placement from Dunkin' Donuts. They had paid her to actually always be with a Dunkin' Donuts iced coffee. So this is the next new wave as well, which is the influencer. So again, thinking of that super peer mindset. So food brands establish promotional relationships with online influencers who then promote the brands as part of the content they post. And this is really difficult to spot. The FCC has actually cracked down on this somewhat, but it's very, very hard to regulate. Many YouTube channels that are wildly popular with young kids are targeting them with thinly veiled ads for sugary beverages and junk food. And I cannot stress how clever these advertisements are. So in terms of what you can do, definitely knowing what your child is consuming, talking about it is incredibly important. If your child is really young, making sure you tag those, you have those channels that are available to them that you have approved. But again, just like that mom in the New York Times study, you really have to keep an eye on it. So it might be fine one day, but then knowing, is this consistently going to be content that you want your child consuming? Supporting a healthy diet is always crucial. Making sure to have time for play and physical activity is super helpful. And I will, a note on this, physical activity they are the words that we use instead of exercise. Research shows that if you kind of constantly push the term exercise, what it does is it conjures up for all of us, sweating, running, which I loathe, having to be really physically active, really draining. Really draining, not physically active. However, if you talk about physical activity and just say like, hey, let's just take a walk, let's ride a bike, something like that, it takes off less of that brain drain and doesn't conjure images of, oh, I have to go for a run. So we find that it's much, much more effective. And we're working actually with schools to do physical activity programs as opposed to, say exercise programs or gym. Physical activity seems to be really effective for kids who are a little bit hesitant to get out there. encouraging daily outdoor time, whether visiting the backyard or taking a walk or a bike ride around the neighborhood. And then again, getting enough sleep, which is a really good segue into learning as well as sleep, which we will touch upon here too. So learning, this is part of Fairfax County Schools. Learning is incredibly important. We're often asked, what are the best educational learning tools? What are the best educational apps? What are the best television shows, etc.? And one, I just want to caution on that because we're always asked for recommendations. We definitely shy away from recommending certain products and applications and things like that. That said, you should also know that the term educational is one that is not regulated. So anyone selling anything in the App Store or, saying a TV show is educational, they can just make that claim without having any kind of research to back it up. The exception to that is that PBS stations, the programming that they show for kids, things like your Sesame Streets, things that like your Arthurs, those shows have been scientifically researched to have specific learning outcomes and goals associated with them. So we always recommend anything that's been vetted by PBS is going to have a solid curriculum underpinning that. And they also have a series of educational apps, things like that, anything from Sesame Workshop as well, which I know moved to HBO, but is also on PBS. So you can find them, but you do really have to dig and test it out yourself. The other thing we always say at the lab too is that all media are educational. Even if it isn't teaching your child ABCs or math or how to socialize, they're going to learn something from it. Again, thinking about all those health effects, whether or not that's violence, whether or not that's, how to inappropriately behave with others and interact with others in a disrespectful manner, all media are educational. So something really to keep in mind when we're talking about educational media. There were a number of questions that came in about how do I help keep my child focused? And this was huge, especially during the pandemic. And I will say this was big with the parent set as well. If you think about, I'm at home right now too, distractions abound everywhere. So how can we make it a place and a time that is focused activities? So one thing that we always say is everybody likes to say that they multitask, especially teens, but younger kids as well, and adults. Like, oh, I'm able to do so many things at some different times. I'm able to give a presentation and check my text messages and also, write a book chapter or something like that. Or kids, I can watch that video, listen to music, and do my homework all at the same time. And that is a very big myth. We all love to think that we can multitask, but really what's happening is your brain is toggling from thing to thing. And the more things that your brain has to attenuate to or toggle to, the worse it gets. So multitasking with media actually leads to taking longer because you think your brain has to switch from one thing to the next. Again, the more things, it takes more time. It takes longer for you to complete your work or for your child to complete their work. It also leads to much, much poorer quality of work. I don't know if you've ever had an experience or your child has had an experience where, they complete something and then you read it back and you're like, oh my gosh, that's so terrible. And it's because you weren't focused on it, right? You weren't focused on making it the best that it could possibly be. So we always recommend, and I'll go into this in the next slide too, of setting up a workstation. So I'll go into more detail about that. We will also see that more research is needed to understand how new technologies affect learning before classroom adoption. This point was kind of blown out of the water with last year's pandemic or onset of the pandemic because we were all just thrust into it. That said, now that we're able to kind of come back, reflect, and learn, we need to do that due diligence to make sure that these tools were actually effective. It's one thing to think remote learning was effective. It's another to actually know that it was effective and what aspects of it were effective and what do we need to change. So just another plug for going directly to the research and also understanding that there are many positive uses. So it's not that there are no educational technologies. I think we all know by now, I think this was more in question in the before pandemic times, but I think we all know by now the value that these technologies have with learning. So what you can do, again, knowing the devices and software your child's school uses and what will be needed at home, especially now where we've all lived through a pandemic school year, making sure that you're aware of how to use those devices, whether your child is going home with one or asked to use one, making sure that you can log into it yourself and help your child in that space. Communicate and check in with your child's school and teacher, check out their resources, their library, if they offer tutorials or workshops about how to use these different technologies, attending, parent-teacher conferences where you can ask specific questions, as well as if they have a workshop night or an open question night, going to those, or, at least logging into them. And then setting up a school area in your home. This is really, really big. And a lot of people, and excuse me one second, a lot of times, I speak to people in urban environments too, in New York City, and they're like, we don't have air, like there's no space to set up a school area. And actually that's not what we mean at all. What we mean is a place where your child can work that you can actually observe. So that you can check in on them every now and again, because we know that if a parent is checking in on what's happening, the child is so much more likely to stay on task. Now, the caveat here is that it can be very difficult when there's a workstation happening at home and there's also a school station happening at home and everybody is on Zoom and it is loud. So do what you can. Headphones are amazing for this, but anytime, even if you're just getting up to get coffee or to walk and check to see what is on your child's screen, walk to make sure that they aren't watching videos, or walk to make sure that there isn't, loud music playing, things like that, and that they're able to stay on task. That will help them stay on task. And that goes into the monitoring schoolwork when possible. A brief note about music, because we're often asked, is music okay? Music is the kind of exception to background media use, where it can actually help a child concentrate. But the caveat here is that the music should be instrumental or in a language that the child does not understand or speak. So no lyrical music. That actually can distract the brain too, and lead to that kind of multitasking, toggling effect. So going now to sleep, which we know is incredibly, incredibly important. Using screens before bed can excite children and teens as well as adults, making it difficult to fall asleep. This was even more, so it's not so much, again, about what they're doing, it's that they're using their brains, right? So it's exciting. It might be even like a calming TV show, but you're still using your brain. So your brain isn't being allowed to kind of shut down as it would, or prepare for sleep if it has to be, listening or attenuating itself to a screen and what's happening on that screen. We all know this, that blue light from screens can disrupt circadian rhythms. I will also say every presentation I'm asked about blue light blocking glasses, and the science is not there in support of blue light blocking glasses. So save your money, unless you like how they look, because they're a great accessory for those of you who like them, but they do not help with this. You can do some things with night shift mode to help mitigate, but remember TVs don't have that. TVs emit a lot of blue light, a lot of older laptops, things like that. And then this one is really big, especially with tweens and adolescents, and that is FOMO, or the fear of missing out. So a lot of teens, we notice, they'll sleep with the phone in bed. For that deep restorative sleep. So it really affects the quality and quantity of your sleep. So what you can do, really help your child create and maintain a healthy bedtime routine. That's true for adolescents. I know sometimes it can be a little harder, but if the whole family gets on board, that's typically a recipe for success. Turning off all screens 1 to 2 hours before bedtime. That's huge. It sounds hard. It is hard, no sugarcoating here, for the first few weeks, and then it becomes routine. Then it just becomes expected. And then for those teens who previously were sleeping with devices in their rooms, creating a new family rule, setting up charging stations in the kitchen or in your bedroom where you can monitor it. If you're worried about your kids sneaking downstairs, we've had a lot of this happen to check the phone, things like that. Put it in your bedroom, have a charging station set up. All devices get accounted for and charged overnight in a place where you can monitor them and they can sleep screen-free. Enable night modes on screens. This will help reduce, it doesn't solve the problem, all of it for screen use. So again, shutting them all off, but enabling night mode, say at like 5 p.m. To reduce the amount of blue light. And then using e-readers. E-readers use something called e-paper and e-ink. And they really mitigate having that blue light effect. So they're much more helpful than reading, say, on a tablet or on a computer or on a smartphone. And then for the teens and for the adults too, who are always like, well, my phone is my alarm clock. Getting an old-fashioned alarm clock, you can get them. I think they were like $2 on Amazon last time I checked. It's a really quick, easy, inexpensive fix to that problem. The next and the last kind of health broadly concern that I want to talk about is connectedness. And we're really going to be focusing on social media here. So this is mostly going to be for your older children, your tweens, your teens, but for younger children as well too. Some of this is applicable. We know that media and connection is content dependent, so it can be really pro-social. We saw, again, in those survey data that most families actually feel that what their child was doing in social media was really positive, but it can also be anti-social. And in terms of social media, there is a large body of evidence to support that it enhances relationships, especially with teens and tweens. However, we also have research that shows that oversharing information can lead to regret, which we know can be hard with the child's mental health, as well as overuse. And we'll talk about what overuse means. Can lead to a decrease in meaningful face-to-face communication. This is something we're really looking at now because we've all been on screens because we couldn't communicate face-to-face. So coming up with the new data and seeing what is actually happening here will be key in these next few months here. We also know that 2+ hours of use increases the risk of cyberbullying. We also know from data that all teenagers ages 13 and up are using social media for more than 2 hours a day. So this increased risk of cyberbullying is applicable for all. However, I do want to stress here that there's been a lot in the news about social media use and depression. I don't know if you all saw the hearings on Capitol Hill yesterday with Antigone Davis, the head of public safety for social media, but they were really being raked over the coals for this social media use and depression idea. So the idea is that social media causes depression in teens. That is not there. The links that we have seen have been correlational only and multifactorial, which means that it's really nuanced. We also see it being far more true for kids who are already depressed and on social media. So these are very, very important distinctions. It's not that your child will go on social media and all of a sudden develop depression. That is not the case. That said, the biggest link that we have seen in our research and clinical research too is this idea of lurking behaviors. And I really want to draw attention to this because lurking behaviors are when your child is on social media and they might have accounts in different areas. They might spend a lot of time on it, but they don't interact. So they are just passively absorbing, whether that's just looking at everybody in Facebook or Instagram or TikTok. They're not liking, they're not commenting, they're literally just absorbing. And what we've been seeing is that these kids feel as though they have nothing to bring to the medium. And they also feel that everybody else is having more fun than they are, doing things that they should be doing. Again, that super peer kind of mentality. And they internalize that and it becomes crippling. It becomes, everybody else is better than me, everybody else is doing more than me. And it can be really negative for their mental health. So that's what we call lurking behaviors. In terms of cyberbullying, this was really interesting. At the beginning of first, this is the definition that we use at the lab. I know every school district is different. My brother is a lawyer, so he's always reminding me of there is a legal definition that is kind of state to state dependent. But this is the definition that we use at the lab. So it occurs when a child or a teen threatens, harasses, or humiliates a peer using electronic technology or is the target of such actions. And at the beginning of the pandemic, everybody was incredibly worried about cyberbullying. This was just one headline: online school raises new concerns about cyberbullying. Research published last month found that cyberbullying across the board actually went down in the online school, in remote schooling situations. So that's a plus. However, it'll be very interesting to see what's happening now where most school districts are open. But it was nice to see that the concern was not backed up by the actual experience. So a win from the pandemic for sure. And hopefully we can keep that up as we go through. In terms of cyberbullying, some of the facts that we know that it's common. We know that it's incredibly complex. It can be from someone who the child knows. It could be from someone the child has no idea who they are. They're just a troll on the internet. It can be a one-time reaction, say a really mean comment on a YouTube video that's posted or a TikTok video. Or it can be frequent. It can be every single day. It can be every hour. It can be every minute that somebody is cyberbullying someone else. It can be online only, or it can be on and offline. I will say we see more of the on and offline, which is really good for those of you who have a child in school, understanding that it might be a classmate. So looking there and talking to your child about what they're experiencing in school. It can involve impersonation, where somebody pretends to be your child. It can involve outing and trickery because of that impersonation. And it can also involve cyber stalking. Just a few more research-based facts. There are minimal differences between males and females and their frequency and role as bully or target. When I first started speaking about this, there was this idea that it was only girls who had this problem, but that is absolutely not true. There's also a huge mental health impact that we've been studying and tracking longitudinally. It can lead to low self-esteem, suicidal ideation or suicidal thoughts, anger and frustration. Schools often catch this first because they notice the child is having some behavioral problems and the child's grades are dropping. It can also lead to substance abuse. We see this with tweens and teens, and delinquency. And there is a very, very strong link between traditional bullying and cyberbullying. Dr. Peter Lavallee, who is a pediatrician who we work with at Boston Children's Hospital, he is kind of the leading expert at this. I highly recommend checking out his work too, and I can send that resource over. This was something that came out and I think deserves some airtime. This came out pre-pandemic. This was 2020, but January of 2020. And this is the idea of self-cyberbullying, which is something that researchers are looking into. And at that time, so January 2020, nearly 9% of American adolescents have cyberbullied themselves, meaning that they try, this came about because of two high-profile suicide cases, one in the US, one in England. And what happened was after these children died, the researchers and police officers who were involved actually traced it back that the cyberbullying incident was happening from the child to the child. So it was obviously a cry for help, a cry for attention, and a need there, but there was no other target or no other bully that was involved. So the research is very new on this. We do see that it's slightly more common in boys than in girls. That said, we must treat all reported instances of cyberbullying similarly. We can't say, oh, I'm just sure you're doing that to yourself. That is not the case here. It's just something that we never looked into before, and clearly it does happen, and we need to look into it as parents, as school systems, et cetera, as clinicians. Media and connection, overall well-being, beyond just your cyberbullying. Last week or 2 weeks ago, the Wall Street Journal released every single day a scathing report on Facebook. The biggest one that hit my world was this: Facebook knows Instagram is toxic for teen girls. There's been a lot of competing headlines, competing information that's been reported in the news media. This screen I love to show because this is actually teens who are reporting on themselves. So, what has been lost by learning in a pandemic? So this was specifically a negatively framed question. So again, not reporting on the positives, but if you notice and you look around these sticky notes, there's a lot about friendships, social skills, human interaction, communication with friends, mental health, It's mostly about that kind of social connection. So now I really want to talk about, and I'm sorry that there's so much information here and we will have time for questions, but I really want to talk about when it becomes a problem. So we have a clinic, it's the first clinic of its kind at Boston Children's Hospital. It is the Clinic on Interactive Media and Internet Use Disorders, or Internet Disorders, excuse me. And it's a long phrase and we've shortened it to PIMU. And what we mean by that is when media are overused or used compulsively, they can interfere with a child's daily life and lead to poor school performance, family conflicts, emotional and psychological concerns, and relationship problems. I do want to stress that it is different from addiction. I'm going to show a brief video. This was done pre-pandemic in 2019. Diane Sawyer came to our clinic. You'll hear from Dr. Michael Rich, who is our founder and director of the clinic. And he kind of gives an overview of the types of patients that we see and also what problematic interactive media use is and does. And I will be drinking a lot of tea during this video, so hopefully spare you my grainy voice. But here's Dr. Rich.
How long is your waiting list?
Unfortunately, too long.
This is Dr. Michael Rich, director of the Clinic for Interactive Media and Internet Disorders at Boston Children's Hospital, who wants these parents to know their kids may have an underlying vulnerability.
Other things that they come to games with,
Absolutely.
like attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. It's huge in the kids who have gaming issues. We have yet to see a young person who does not also have a condition such as anxiety, mood disorders are driving these behaviors.
And he encourages parents and all of us not to use the word addiction.
While it looks and feels to your mom like an addiction, it's not actually an addiction so much as it's sort of behavioral manipulation.
This is the mother of 13-year-old Leo, and she's asking about her son's love of Fortnite.
This game was just, the draw to it was unbelievable.
Dr. Rich tells them a lot of kids feel that way.
They make their money not only by getting you to play, but keeping you playing. And it's very carefully designed to do that.
Dr. Rich also tells parents to sit down with their kids, go through the techniques, and demystify the game.
I say, sit down next to your son and play the game with them and help him understand what is happening. They will really recognize how they are being manipulated.
And here in his office, 17-year-old Felix, whose parents tell Dr. Rich about the time he spends on screens, the hours and hours on the video game Counter-Strike.
If I were to ask you what brought you in here today, what would you say?
My parents.
Yeah, I know, exactly.
Is that the most common answer you get?
Yeah, of course
It is. Clearly, for many months, there's been zero homework done, literally zero.
The problem is it's way more fun to figure out games than it is to figure out calculus, right?
So we set out on another question tonight. What does science really know about the behavior that concerns these parents? Especially since we know in kids the brain is still developing. So we consulted dozens of experts, neuroscientists, psychologists, psychiatrists,
As well as other.
This is Dr. Mark Potenza, a professor of psychiatry, child study, and neuroscience, who came in from Yale.
So the question is, why is it that some people develop problems with a certain behavior?
Dr. Potenza has reviewed dozens of brain studies. Some of the subjects had no problems with games, some did. And he believes there are interesting questions about what's happening in some parts of the brain, some areas that have also raised questions in brain studies about gamblers with problems. But when it comes to gaming, he says a lot more studies need to be done.
This is intriguing, raising some questions, but we don't have the answer to this.
We don't have the full answer.
So I think there are some
NYU child and adolescent psychologist Dr. Yamalis Diaz sat down with us too.
these brain studies are really useful for us to begin to look and see whether or not there is some sort of potential long-term effect, but we don't know yet. And so really what this tells us is we need to be mindful. Whether we're calling it addiction, a disorder, it's a problem.
Dr. Rich hopes parents will catch any problems early, noticing a lapse in homework, physical activity, or sleep, and get help.
So you think we're going to get on top of this?
Absolutely.
And he says he hopes the gaming companies are ready to step in too. So we reached out to the industry trade group. You should know they have age and content ratings for games. And they got back to us with this statement. Video game consoles have parental controls that help parents limit how long video games are played. Those controls help ensure that video games, like any other leisure activity, are part of a well-rounded lifestyle. Anything done to excess runs counter to achieving that balance.
I don't want to ascribe malevolence to their intent. I want them to work with clinicians and work together toward kinder, smarter, and stronger kids.
Okay, I will say on that last hopeful note, again, this was 2019. We are now working with folks at Roblox and other gaming industries to help kind of build in that wellness component. Again, knowing what problematic interactive media use is to help players, help users, help kids avoid that, help families avoid those things as well. So just to recap a little bit, because again, I think, you know, a lot of the focus on this presentation is, and a lot of concerns that parents have is, you know, is what my child doing normal or is it a problem? And being able to give folks the tools to understand, like, okay, this is when it's actually a clinical problem. This is when it's, you know, it's disrupting family life, but we can handle it with different tools. And this is actually pretty normal. Most kids spend time gaming, so kind of differentiating it between those levels. So in terms of problematic interactive media use, and again, we're talking about it from a clinical perspective here. These are the symptoms that are basically appear in all of the patients that we see at the clinic. And that is spending more time alone in their room, poor sleep, excessive daytime sleepiness. This is typically noted by the teachers, kids falling asleep in class, poor personal hygiene, decreased self-care, kids stopping to shower because they're gaming all night or on some form of media, decrease in school performance, that's when the grades fall, social withdrawal, they used to be very social and outgoing, now they don't even want to see their friends, secrecy and extreme measures to access media. This one I want to pause on just for a second, because when the patients that we see at Children's, some of these measures are absolutely extreme. We've had kids threaten suicide and attempt suicide. We had one patient who, you know, he was a gamer and he thought that his parents took the gaming console, locked it in the car. He took a sledgehammer to the car. There are a lot of extreme measures. So that's what we mean by extreme. We also know that it can be very frightening for a parent to shut off TV and see their child kind of melt down, you know, go into that temper tantrum, whether it's a young child, we see this all the time with toddlers and melting down, but that's also kind of typical for toddlers when you think about their developmental stage. So this is something to really understand the different gradations of what is extreme. And we do have a measure of that and have an intake screener for getting treatment at our clinic that can help you do that as well. Increased irritability, especially when offline. So they are just completely unhappy if they are not on social media, if they're not gaming, things like that, if that's been taken away from them. This is also important. So this is ongoing. We opened the clinic in 2017, so it's relatively new. But we have never, Dr. Rich kind of alluded to this in the video that I just showed, we've never seen a child come in where it's just about their media use, not once. And we've seen a lot of patients at this point. There is always some sort of underlying health issue. Oftentimes, it's not diagnosed. So a kid may have ADHD and not know, and their parents might not know. And what happens is that they are channeling some of their needs and some of that drive that they have through their media use. It's being expressed. These problems are being expressed through their media use. So what we do at the clinic is really try to isolate and understand what else is going on with this kid, whether it's ADHD, whether it's in some sort of anxiety disorder, whether it's a mood disorder, whether it's a sleep disorder, or a developmental learning difference. There is something else that's going on. So we really have to isolate that and be able to treat that as well. Why I say this is also important is if your child already suffers or has one of these health issues and is also struggling with their media use, it's definitely a comorbidity. It's definitely something to be aware of. They're at a more heightened risk for developing PIMU. PIMU itself can also contribute to health problems such as weight gain, which we talked about before, eating disorders. That's a whole other topic that I talk at length about, especially with social media messages and things like that, as well as sleep problems. So treatments, understanding that abstinence is not the answer. We are constantly bombarded by parents asking us like, hey, I read about this camp that I can send my kid to where you're off devices and it's going to solve their media problems. Our response is always camps are great. Camps are wonderful. Summer camps are great, especially tech-free camps. That's amazing. They're not going to solve a PIMU issue. And that is because taking away media and saying like, oh, okay, now you're cured, go back to your media saturated life. Again, thinking about this as an environmental health issue where they need it to connect with their friends, where they need it to be a functional member of society in this day and age to learn all of the things. Abstinence, that kind of disconnect from media is not a long-term solution. Summer camps to take a break, great, but summer camps were always great even before media existed. So really understanding that abstinence is not the answer and taking a holistic approach to this. So reviewing how long, and this is with the family, the treatments that we do often do bring in family members, reviewing how long, how often, and how many screens are used in order to better understand how media are used by all members of the family, what the requirement is for school, because often parents may not know it's a problem because the kid is saying like, oh, I need it for school. I'm just doing schoolwork. I'm just doing schoolwork. Again, this is the importance of having that school area where you check in. So understanding like, is that their truth? Is that actually what's happening? Or can we, this is the dedicated school space. This is actually how much time you should be spending on homework. Do we need to work with the teachers to say like, actually, he can't be on screens. He or she can't be on screens for that long and figure out a work plan around that. It's a really holistic approach. And then in terms of therapies, we've developed our own. It is most akin to cognitive behavioral therapy, but it's also a mix of DBT as well. And for those of you who are interested in kind of more information about CIMAID, I'm happy to provide links and information on that as well. So in terms of kind of shifting gears a little, just to close out so we have time for questions, supporting well-being during the school year. I love this cartoon. It's a little grainy, so I'll just say, you see a toddler trying to text on a cracker, and the mom is saying, maybe we should put away our phones. She's trying to text on a cracker. So all that is to say, being mindful of your own media use. We have found again and again through studies that parents' media use is the biggest indicator of kids' media use. So if you are setting family rules around how much time, about where, making sure that you abide by those rules and set a good example for your kids as well. Setting media boundaries designed for the whole family. And again, creating the rules together, especially if you have a child who's old enough and able to do this. So anywhere from, a 6-year-old even to help them kind of get involved in the process, but definitely your teenagers, making sure that there's buy-in. So talking about buy-in, also talking about consequences. So if they do break it, they understand what those consequences will be ahead of time. So it's not like, oh, you broke the rules, so now that you can't go out, and then the child throws a fit. Understanding what the consequences are ahead of time. We know will lead to not only more adherence or obeying of the rules, but also a better understanding too, a better like family life when those rules are broken and then they know the consequences. Media-free meals are hugely important. We used to always say device-free dinners were the best. We know that that doesn't fit all working families or any family necessarily. It could be lunch, if that fits best, or it could just be breakfast, but a time where the whole family comes together to talk about your days without any devices. That's devices in your hands, on the tables, or in the background, no background TV as well. Utilizing video chat mindfully during the pandemic, that was the key kind of caveats if your whole family can't be together. But really, if you can have a media-free meal, that is the best. And explore the possibility of having a weekly digital Sabbath as a family or as an individual. So this is hard. This is kind of the big challenge thing, but that is 1 day a week where you go device free for the entire day. This is especially helpful, we've noticed, for families who have a child who has come into our clinic. We often give them this kind of directive. It's hard to do at first. It's really hard to do at first. Tiffany Schlein has a wonderful book on this called 24/7. That kind of breaks down that journey, but it's really, really rewarding, especially for families who are struggling with this. And then finally, again, we never demonize media at the lab. The research doesn't. We love media at the lab too. It's an amazing. They're amazing tools. So really shifting it from, the idea of entertainment. I think the pandemic helped us all shift our view, but they're tools for learning. They're tools for community engagement. This is one way of engaging in the community. It's a space, especially for kids, especially for teens, to kind of highlight and to bring forth their individual and collective creativity as well as mastery. It's a way of expanding connections, and it helps, again, your adolescents really develop and foster identity. They can do a lot of that, especially through social media platforms. Some resources that I want to highlight here, which I think was already sent out to you, but all of our resources are freely available. So I highly encourage everyone to go and visit them, to use that email address that was mailed to you, which is literally dwl@childrens.harvard.edu. We have a whole team. Myself, I get questions all the time that I love answering as quickly as I possibly can, but we have access to research, information. We have a family digital wellness guide, back to school guides. We're coming out with guides all the time per the season. We give webinars, we have lectures and presentations, and we're also on social media, those channels down there, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, as well as Twitter. I will also say, for those of you who are educators, we are offering our first live webinar. We're offering continuing medical education credit as well as continuing education credit for educators. I will be presenting at this as well, along with more clinicians and other folks from the lab. And that is going to be October 15th. So anybody who is interested, I can give the organizers kind of information on that as well. And then also just a thank you. Thank you so much for having me, for dealing with my very cracky voice, and also just kind of helping get the information, asking your wonderful questions as well. So thank you so much. And I'm happy to, I think we have about 15 minutes to answer anyone's questions. So I can go ahead and stop the share.
So thank you very much. And let's go to our questions. And your voice was fine, by the way. All right, our first question is, a parent is concerned about the transition from online interaction to the in-person interaction with friends. They are concerned about the quality of the relationships with others, as the child or student prefers virtual and social media interactions. What does science say about it, as it may cause social deficits in this generation?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. I will say, we're experiencing this now, so we don't have a robust amount of information. That said, we can kind of go back. Again, my background is developmental psychology. There's a lot about developmental psychology that can inform what this child is dealing with. So it is very, very common, the transition from, like, say, the summer months, when a kid is primarily seeing maybe a few friends, not even their school friends, it might be camp friends, or maybe they're just hanging out with their families, to transitioning back into school. There's a lot of anxiety that comes with it. I think we can all, get the jitters, even going back to the workplace. Is it going to be weird? How are we going to interact? The thing that we are recommending a lot at the lab is really sitting down and having an open, honest conversation with the child, understanding what their fears are. And also, it's really helpful to remind them that we're all in the same boat. Right? All of us are in the same boat. It's weird for everybody, even those people who are excited about going back. Nobody is well versed in this. So also explaining your fears, when parents kind of break down their own fears, like, oh yeah, it's going to be a little different seeing, so-and-so, because I haven't seen them in a while, but I am looking forward to it. setting up or kind of fostering play dates or interactions where there's an activity that's involved. So it's not just like, oh yeah, go ahead and like be, just see each other, maybe go to a movie. Again, that's a mediated experience that can be really helpful, or go to a soccer game, something where it's not just, meeting is the primary activity and goal. You can actually help mitigate some anxieties that way by providing a specific activity for the child. I will also say with the social deficit, I know there's a lot of concerns. Kids are so incredibly resilient, and we really can't underestimate them. They've been doing so much better than we thought, just from the beginning of the pandemic to now, even just as I shared before with the cyberbullying concerns, and we actually saw a big drop. So we don't know about the social deficit. So what we can do, though, is prepare them for success as best as possible, and alleviate some of their anxieties. So that would be my recommendation on that one.
Okay, thank you. My 13-year-old desperately wants to fit in with his peers and is wanting to join Discord and Snapchat. I've seen what these have done to his older brother and have been hesitant to give in. Are these okay for his age, or could you recommend a better choice or choices?
Okay, and I'm sorry, the child was 13?
Yes.
So, and I'm not sure what happened with the older brother, with the family history there. But what I would advise is any parent knows their child the best. So 13 is not a magic number. There's actually no magic number for getting on these platforms. I will say in this country, it's actually illegal to be on them before age 13 under COPPA, which is the Child Protection Act. So, we always try to mention that as kind of a gate. That said, that there are a lot of 13-year-olds who are not developmentally ready to be on any of these applications. There are some 16-year-olds who are not developmentally ready. That said, there's also some 12-year-olds who, if it wasn't illegal, we'd say, you know what, you can handle this. That said, it's never about one social media application being bad, right? Snapchat is very interesting because you can really curate your friends. You can make it a very closed communication system that has a ton of benefits. So my recommendation there would be to talk to the child, see why they want to use it, what they plan on doing with it. If you feel from that conversation that they are developmentally ready to actually have that application on their phone, set up the account together, make sure that you have the child's password and ability to check in on what they're doing whenever you want. So that's the rule that goes in place before they're allowed to join. And I guarantee you, just knowing that you can take their phone and check in at any random interval will help your child stay on track. But I would also caveat with this, I don't know what happened with the older sibling. So, again, your child the best and can kind of make a decision from there.
Okay, thank you. Next question. I want to filter Amazon Kids Plus content so that my child doesn't experience the aware or ad game. Any thoughts on first steps?
So Amazon Kids is actually someone we work with. I'm not familiar with the filtering process, like specifically for Amazon Kids. What I would recommend for that is if you email the lab, because I don't want to answer incorrectly. So if you email the lab that question, we can actually get that answer from Amazon Kids directly, because as I said, we work with them. So that would be my kind of like pushing it to the side, but temporarily, just because I want to provide the best information possible.
Absolutely. Okay, I appreciate the focus on the problem of obesity, which certainly requires our attention. I hope we are not overlooking the spike in eating disorders through the pandemic, because you did mention that. And during the pandemic, whether the increase is linked to more time spent online, particularly social media, where our teens, especially our girls, but not boys as well, are bombarded with images of beauty, fitness, diet, culture, etc.
Yes, no, this is an excellent question. And the reality is I have a whole other presentation that is just an hour dedicated to eating disorders and social media use specifically, as well as just any kind of media use bombarded with images, because it is It is a highly nuanced issue and one that deserves kind of like the full hour. Obesity rates, as we can see, because it's so top of mind right now with the pandemic, we've seen such a big jump, and a big jump for younger kids as well as adolescents with eating disorders. It's primarily your tweens and teens. So to kind of cover the gamut, that's why I chose to talk about obesity. That said, we have a whole section on our website dedicated to eating disorders specifically. I will also say that Dr. Bryn Austin is the leading, I believe she's the leading researcher and clinician at Boston Children's Hospital, but this is for the nation. So we have access to her. So if there's something that you cannot find on our website, please email your specific question to the lab and we can get her input on that. Or, you know, we have expertise at the lab. I'm happy to speak to the specifics. It is a real problem, but it is also really, really nuanced. So I'd have to get more information to kind of address any specific questions on it.
Okay. If you could talk a little bit more about addiction or whether it's not addiction. The question reads, the TV clip you showed did not rule out addiction. You seem to be going through great lengths to say it's not addiction. Why is that?
Yes, and I'm sorry for any ambiguity. We often have to kind of insert the word addiction because in the public vernacular, that's the word that's being bandied about. It's an addiction. I'm addicted. I feel addicted to my smartphone. Kids will say it all the time too. But the reality is that it's different. It's the brain chemicals are different. The reactions are different. When we think of like a typical addiction to cigarettes, you can take away tobacco. You can't, again, with the whole like abstinence is not an option here. This is an environmental health issue. It's not a substance. So that's also right now why it's not classified as an addiction. So in our clinic, that's why we've labeled it problematic interactive media use. The other reason why we're moving away from addiction is because it is a heavily stigmatized term. People feel as though, you know, it's just a complete loss of control. What I will say, it's akin mostly, if we want to think about it this way, to binge eating disorder, kind of going back to eating disorders. But binge eating disorder, it's an overuse of a necessary resource, right? So we all need food. Abstinence is absolutely not an option when it comes to food. You can't just take away food and have the person who's suffering from that addiction be cured. But it is a temporary loss of control, right? You feel like you have to consume, bingers feel like they have to consume all of this food right now. They won't stop, and then they will physically, you know, they have really negative physical ramifications from that. Throwing up, poor body image, you know, it makes their mental health suffer, all of this. That is what we see with problematic interactive media use. So again, using that same example, gamers, they feel like they're so locked in, they absolutely can't stop. The kids that we see, they actually look like they have an eating disorder because they are so malnourished. They will typically only consume foods through straws because then they don't have to use their hands at all. They are so sleep deprived. They know that like they are unhappy. Same with bingers. They don't feel good after going through a session like this. So it is much more akin to a psychological disorder such as that than it is an addiction. So it is a very distinct classification and one that, you know, we've written a number of publications and we're really trying to do our due diligence with this work in getting that messaging out. But it is very hard to kind of fight public opinion and public, you know, everybody knows the word addiction. So it's just about having sessions like this, getting education out there and saying like, we really need to understand this problem for what it is, which is not addiction.
Thank you. So is there any research on the intersection of media use and the increase of child abuse and or neglect?
Ooh, so I'm assuming that this is about a parent's media use and abusing kids or neglecting kids.
Probably in the neglect.
Not, my guess is that there is. Our lab focuses primarily on birth to 25 media use. So that said, 25-year-olds who have, or, you know, young adults, teens also have children of their own. I'm not aware of research looking specifically at whether or not their media use contributes to the abuse or neglect of their child. So that doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. So if that question gets emailed, I'm happy to see if our librarian can pull some of those studies. It's just that's kind of out of our lab area of insight.
Okay. I appreciate the suggestion to set up accounts like Discord, Snapchat, et cetera, together and know their password, and stress that parents can check in at any point. And we'll do this when it's time for the younger child, but any recommendations for how to gain better control or supervision of a tween that already has unsupervised access to Snapchat and Discord, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, we get this question a lot because usually it's parents who are like, oh, it's, you know, it's past that point, which is fine. That it's not as though there's no hope. But it does require more work. It requires sitting down with a child, having that conversation about needing to have access to that device and to those accounts. And the way that's really effective in communicating that, we always suggest don't do it during a fight. So setting aside a time when everybody's calm. And also, you know, basically saying that it's so that you as their parent can help them should anything arise. And also reminding them that it is a privilege for them to have a device, for them to have access to these applications, but that you need to be involved in that and that you're not taking it away, that you're more than happy to, you know, have them be on those things, but that if there's ever a concern that arises, you need to be able to help them out in those spaces. So it's a hard conversation. Our Family Digital Wellness Guide actually has some icebreakers about how to have those conversations with your child. But it's a conversation that needs to happen. And if they disagree, the ramification is that they are no longer to have that device or that application. So that's kind of, it's tough, but it's definitely doable.
Okay. Is there any research regarding young adults with intellectual disabilities?
Yes, there absolutely is. So I will say that those studies are somewhat smaller, but it would depend on the intellectual disability. And our library, we have something that's called Media Health Effects, which is our database of research. And it has an advanced search feature where you can actually search by a developmental disability or a learning disability, ADHD, things that children come to media or come to their experience with media with, and to see how like the interactivity changes and what the potential health consequences, concerns, and also positive uses are with that media. So I highly recommend visiting that resource. Oh, and I don't know. If Lisa, you're still there, or if we've stopped because we're out of time.
Hi, this is Erica. I'm going to let you know another question that just came in. Do you recommend setting limits to the time that a tween can spend on social media or just devices in general?
That's about time limits?
Yes, so in general on social media and also on devices in general for that tween, or if you want to recommend for any other age limits.
Yes, so this actually I can give a broad stroke age limits, or not even age limits, just limits for kids, because again, screen time is really a concept that we find obsolete now. So what we recommend is really sitting down with the child if they're old enough and have a device and figuring out their 24-hour day, factoring in all the time that they need for sleep, all the time that they need for school, the time they need for homework, the time they want to spend with their friends in person, as well as any other activities. So really mapping out in granularity all of that time and then saying, oh, look, this is how much time you have for, oh, I will also say meal times, which should be device free. This is how much time you have left over to dedicate to the screen media activities of your choice, and map those out. Are they social media? Are they going to the movies? Are they watching TV? And that will give the child a real concrete, reasoning behind that limit. We also don't call it limitations. It's like, this is how much time you can use it for, or should use it for, so that you can accomplish all of these other super important things in your life. that's a good way of, we found it to be a very successful way of framing it, especially for teens, to say like, it's not, you know, it's not that you can't use it, it's that you're doing all of these other things as well. So this is the time you have left to dedicate to those things. So really fitting it into their day. That also answers kind of the you know, how do we balance time? That's a really good measure of, or way of balancing a child's time.
Absolutely. So I just want to thank you for your time and all that you all do at the lab to be able to help families and our kids. We're very grateful for the research that you do and for sharing everything that you did with us today. I want to thank all of our participants and those who will be joining us on YouTube to watch this later. We will be sharing resources, and if you'd like to receive those, you can contact the lab directly or email us at prc@fcps.edu. Thank you so much and have a wonderful day. If your question was not answered, please do reach out to either or both of us. We're all here for you. Take care.